Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome listeners, you're on Big Little Small Talk and you're with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan. Today I have another person with an Order of Australia medal, an AM, and his name is Lance C. Smith. He's an 80-year-old gentleman that I met at a interesting night, one night at the Downs Steam. Welcome, Lance, to my segment, Big Little Small Talk.
Thank you, Megan.
I'm going to start off, Lance, by asking you the question, what is the brighter side of a death threat?
Okay, the brighter side of a death threat is actually the title of my autobiography. That was the first book I ever wrote. And it was basically brought on by I worked for 20 years with the oncology kids at Sydney Children's Hospital. And we used to bring one 10-day trip per year up north to Queensland just before these group of kids, they were very seriously ill, and just before they had a bone marrow transplant. And so the idea was that Dr. Stevens at the time wanted to find out what it did to them both physically and mentally prior to their operations, which was basically what he called the last chance dance. And we would come up and we would do some amazing things for 10 days. But the brighter side of the death threat were these kids facing an awful, very short time on Earth, and their attitude to life and their strength and their coping mechanisms. Oh, dear, it was amazing. So it was always the brighter side of a death threat. Those kids had a sense of humour second to none.
Right. Well, that wasn't what I thought you were going to say. I thought it must have been a crime novel or something like that. So, Lance, you are... Well, let me get straight first off. Are you a Lance or a Lance?
I'm a Lance.
You're a Lance?
Yes.
You're a good Aussie Lance.
Unless I'm a Kiwi, then I'm a Lance. Or South Australian, I think.
Well, let's go back, right to the very beginning, because I do want to talk about the Bear Cottage, which you've just mentioned there, but I want to talk about how you ended up in the Whitsundays as a dive instructor and a entrepreneur, was it? And this was after you'd been after you'd been in Europe.
Yes. I'd left the London Fire Brigade. I came home. I joined the New South Wales Fire Brigade at King's Cross, and then after a few years I decided I wanted to do more about my diving, and I took on the job of diving instructor on Daydream Island. And I was there until Cyclone Ada. In January 1970, the cyclone came through and closed down South Mole, Hayman and Daydream for quite some time. I had a few good years up there, and that's where I met my bride. But when you're on Daydream in those days, you didn't just do the job you were sent there for. You were in the entertaining business, you were the street sweeper, you were the pool cleaner, you were everything. It was great. It was a great year. $43 a week.
Oh, paid in cash, no doubt.
Yes.
So, Lance, just take me back before that. Where had you grown up? Where had you spent your early years?
Okay, I was born in Sydney. My father was an architect with the government, so we lived in Broken Hill, Coffs Harbour, Cootamundra, Bathurst. We kind of were all over the place, and I ended up back in Sydney when I was about 14, and I left Australia when I was 16 and went over to Europe.
And you mentioned that you'd been in the London Fire Brigade.
Correct, yeah.
So what we're talking, sort of mid-60s?
No, late 59. 59 was when I left Australia, and I joined the Fire Brigade in 61 in England, in London, and I came home in 64, and I spent 3 years then at King's Cross Fire Station. I transferred out to New South Wales, and then I went up to Daydream.
So tell me about going to London in the late 50s, early 60s. Was it exciting? What did you do? Like, were you an Aussie fish out of water, or were there a lot of Aussies over there sort of doing that big trek?
There weren't a lot, not as many as there are today. Today's just, it's passage, everybody goes on it. Let's just say that when I went over on a ship called the Castel Felice, one of the Sitmar lines back in those days, and when I got there, everybody on board seemed to be heading for a place called Earl's Court, and I was there for about 48 hours, and it was full of Australians and Kiwis and Yappies, South Africans, and that's not what I went for. So I left very quickly, and I just started to explore, and I loved it. I had the time of my life. Mind you, I think back now, at the time I was 16 and I knew everything. I guess I didn't. Time proved that.
You were a 16-year-old boy.
I was.
You went on the boat. How long did that take?
7 weeks to get to England.
7 weeks, wow. And were people sort of worried about you as a 16-year-old being on your own? Were you on your own?
I was on my own. So yes, particularly Mum. They were. I couldn't see why. You're bulletproof when you're 16, so I didn't see any problem.
Did you have money saved up? And where did you sleep? Where did you stay?
I worked very, very hard to get to. I did about 8 jobs all through school and saved. And my parents wouldn't let me go until I had 500 quid plus the trip home saved up. So it took me a long while to do that, for about 3 years, I think, from when I was about 13 to when I was 16.
And what was driving the sort of desire to get there? Can you remember, like, had you seen something in a newspaper or...
Very clear. I had an absolute mongrel of a father and I just wanted to get away.
Right.
End of story.
Yeah.
And it was sad, but that was the driver, and it turned out it worked.
And why go to London? Like, why not go around Australia? You just thought that was the furthest you could get?
No, that was the easy choice. They spoke the language that I spoke. I was going to be able to survive no matter what. I was a pretty good worker, and I was pretty keen to try, especially through Europe. I mean, I did all sorts of things. I washed dishes. I did everything that you could imagine. I worked as a nurse's aide in Holland, and I can remember this lady very impressed that the nurse's aide spoke English, and she didn't try me on Dutch.
Lance, I just find it fascinating that you would, like, literally that very first day you got off the ship, where did you sleep?
Earl's Court, just in what they call a backpackers today, just for a couple of days, and then I went out to a little place called Tooting Bec for a little while, and then I went to Europe, and then I came back and I lived in Notting Hill. When I was in the Fire Brigade, I lived in Notting Hill, which in those days was not the fashionable suburb that it is today. As a matter of fact, there was a guy, Sir Oswald Mosley. How they get these titles, I have no idea. He in his black shirts used to come out to where we were and preach anything anti-black. It was really, and then he would take his black shirts and go to Bethnal Green or St John's Wood and preach anti-Semitism over there. I don't know, I mean, I do believe in free speech, but this sort of stuff is just, it's like the far right stuff today. It's rubbish. And it was just interesting. It was a very, very interesting time. I loved it. I loved travelling. I loved discovering, and everything worked out. It had its challenges, yeah, but it was good.
And were you ever, as a young boy, in danger or ripped off or anything like that?
Yes. Not in so much danger. We got into a few things in the Fire Brigade which were pretty ordinary. But no, I didn't have any major danger outside of things like work. But yes, when you are travelling, you get fleeced. Or you've just got to be so careful. We all had bum bags of some description that were never sort of off our bodies, and but even then, people work out ways of pinching stuff off you, and it was part of the course. But we didn't have much.
So you'd found a group of people by this stage, had you? Or you just hooked up with different ones?
No, I just hooked up with people as I went, and it wasn't until I got into the Fire Brigade that I started to form any mateships. And funnily enough, that was 60 years ago, and I'm still close to a lot of them today. Yeah.
Such a formative time in your life. I would love to see some photos of you. Were you really into the music scene or anything? And the fashion?
Not fashion, certainly not, and I still don't. But in music, I've always loved music. I've always been involved in. I've got more involved as life gone on. But I was amazed travelling through Europe. Everywhere you went were jukeboxes, and they were all the American stuff. It was all of the rock and roll stuff. It was the Elvis Presley, it was the crooners, and one of them died just last week, I think, Tony Bennett. I mean, way back then. And they were all the way through Europe, and funnily enough, they couldn't speak English as they do today, but they all knew those songs. And it was kind of like a old home week. Everywhere you went, you'd be in the middle of... I was working in a place called Piraeus in Greece, and the little cafe next door to us, all day was Elvis with Wooden Heart and you know, all those different songs, and it was kind of like being at home. It was good.
So how many years did you spend there before you came back to the work in the cross?
I was away for 5.5 years.
Right, it's such an incredible thing to do. You came home. Were you living in the cross as well as being in the fire?
No, we lived in Lakemba at the time. The family had a home in Lakemba.
So you'd gone home to your mum and dad?
Yes.
And how was that relationship then after sort of travelling the world for 5 years?
It was. I learned how to cope better. And Mum was brilliant, but sadly she died when she was 49. But it was okay. I was able to handle it okay.
So
right.
you
I was never close.
Yeah, you re-established a relationship with your father of sorts.
Enough to survive.
Yeah,
it had been pretty ordinary prior to me going away, but I was a lot different. I was a lot more capable when I got home, and even physically I could stand up to him, which I couldn't before I went.
And then why did you decide to go up north then? And when you say that you're an entertainer at was it South Mole or
Daydream?
What are we talking entertaining?
Righto. I was really a keen diver. I always have been a keen diver since I was a little brat. And I was in a diving club in Sydney, and I couldn't get enough of it. And myself and a couple of police mates, when I was in the fire brigade, we used to earn a lot of money spearing sharks and selling them to fish shops. Mainly down the south coast around Wollongong and south of Wollongong. And I loved it. I loved being underwater. And then what you do as you get older, you want to get rid of the spear guns and the shotgun hand spears, and you want to get a camera because your values change and everything changes. So I wanted to see more of the diving side of it from there, and the Barrier Reef was the draw card. So the only way I could do it was get a job as a diving instructor, and I was good, and on Daydream Island, or on the islands, and Daydream came up, and I went there in 1960, early 68.
And what about the entertainer part?
Well, when you walked on the island, what else can you do? And if you've got two legs and you can hold a tune in any way, shape or form, you're in the luau show on Saturday night, you're in the Roaring Twenties night on a Tuesday. So I had all these songs. I'd sing The Only Man on the Island, all these different things. I loved it. It was good. But no, I'd had no formal training as such. Well, that's not quite right. I did win the Terry Deer National Amateur Hour as a kid with another young bloke called John Griffith. We sang under the title of the Colbert Brothers, and we won his radio amateur hour. That was when I was 15. So I'd had a bit of stuff, but I didn't do anything like we did up on Daydream. It was good, and that was the start of something pretty big.
And all the resorts and things, they were already there by then, were they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hamilton wasn't. There was nothing on Hamilton. No resort. But South Mole, Daydream, Hayman were the three big ones at that particular time. Brampton was there too.
Yes, I didn't realise that they were operating as those resorts
that
early.
were.
Yeah. And was it a bit of a kind of a Wild West frontier? Like, you're...
It's interesting. I look back on it now. Daydream was the only one then that was like the set of South Pacific. It was like going on to Harry Belafonte's island somewhere and singing all the islands in the sun and all that sort of stuff. The others were more upmarket. Hayman certainly was owned by Ansett at the time. It was more upmarket, and it was kind of like a five-star resort is today. They didn't really look or feel like an island, but it was good. It was good. And South Mole, owned by the Bauer family in those days, was a pretty rugged place. But they had a golf course, which was more than we had. Yeah, it was good fun. It was good, but primitive.
Yeah, and how long did you spend up there?
Well, we stayed. The Cyclone Ada came through in January 1970, and some of our staff were killed, some guests were killed on some of the islands. So they lost 17 people that night, and it was 50 years to the day before they actually, at Airlie Beach, we went up in 2020, 50 years to the day before they finally put up a plaque to the 17 people that lost their lives. But I only stayed up long enough to dive to salvage a whole lot of the ships that had been sunk.
What ships had been sunk? In what circumstances?
A lot of pleasure craft, a lot of people who were sailing through the Whitsundays at the time, plus our own boats. Our boat, the main boat on Daydream, the Daydream 2, was a fair mile. That was a 250 passenger boat. It was quite a big one, and our Decky got killed. Our Uncle Bill got killed on that. They're a mixture. From those bigger boats, South Mole lost boats, Hayman lost boats. One boat they've never found with 7 people on board. It was pretty wild.
So tell me about that. I honestly have never sort of heard about this. So did you not know the cyclone was coming through?
Okay.
And how were the people killed apart from drowned on
Good
boats?
point. Okay, the story was with me. Our big boss was Joy Collins on the island, and she had come to me about a month before to say that a little island just south of Daydream, Long Island, there was a place there called Palm Bay, and it was going into liquidation, and they asked her to form a management team. So I was picked to be the manager, and I went down there with a few of the Daydream staff, and we took it over, and we were running that. We got a telex. You're too young to know what a telex was.
Is it even pre-fax, I'm guessing? Is that right, Lance?
Yes. We got a telex telling us that there was a cyclone coming. It was very inaccurate. For argument's sake, it said that the cyclone gusting up to 80 knots. Well, the anemometer on the island blew out at just over 200 knots. It was massive, absolutely massive. None of us knew anything about it. I didn't know there was an eye in a cyclone. So we were so happy when everybody got through unscathed and the cyclone stopped and it went dead still, and for an hour we celebrated. We thought it was good. The hotel had gone. Everything above ground basically had gone, except for a few smashed buildings up the top. And we were pretty excited. The fact, but what we didn't know was, of course, it was coming back the other way. So I've often said to people that in the hours leading up to it, I sent half the team to bed early to do a 2 o'clock shift, and myself and a couple of others said we would do until 2. I think we got them out of bed around about midnight because the roofs were starting to go and things were starting to happen. We learned a lot. It was very character building.
Oh, Lance, I've got chills. I just can't imagine how terrifying. Did you think you were going to die? It must be
Myself
so noisy.
And a fellow named
violent.
Gary Flanagan were trying to get to a hut where we knew there were 2 girls, and we got hit by a tree and taken out to sea. I don't know, I think back now, probably in no more than about 200 metres, but we were just literally picked up in, not badly hurt, cut, but not badly hurt. And we got out of the tree, the pair of us. Gary was also a diver. And funnily enough, there were no waves at that stage. They were all on the other side of the island. The wind was coming across the island. Where we were trying to get back was against the wind, but it was as flat as a pancake. When that's happening, you just go into survival mode. You don't think. And then when we got back on shore, we tried to get up to where we knew those 2 girls were, and by this time their place had gone. They were still there, actually, in a bathroom under a big mattress. And it was... It's kind of like a lot of other things in life. Later on, when you're thinking about it, like we had plenty of time because nobody could come and get us. We had a chef named Manfred and we had no food. And we cut just some wood and some vines and we made some arrows, and he speared a wild goat. And we ate wild goat.
Father, it's like being on Gilligan's Island.
Well,
or
it kind of was.
It
kind of was. And then the Navy came and got us. That was very good when we heard the Navy, the destroyer. The Navy came and got us about 4 days later.
Do you feel now, when you are in a storm, do you feel sort of traumatised by it?
I don't like wind. I'm terrified of driving in lightning. I don't know, and I don't know if it was associated with that or not. I don't ever remember being worried about lightning or wind, but wind does worry me even today, because we went through a fair bit, and I do my level best to stay away from anything that's got sort of major wind gusts.
Whoa, and here I was thinking that going to London was going to be traumatic. When I met you, we were at an event at Down Steam, and there was someone else who was there, who everyone would know, Normie Rowe. What's your association with Normie Rowe? Is it being a fellow recipient of an award, or is there some other way that you know him?
That's interesting. That's when we sort of formed, but probably went closer. Normie and I go back to when I joined a company called Lend Lease and shifted up to the coast in 1985, I think it was, 1985. Might have been a bit earlier than that. We went to a place called Kings Row on the Gold Coast, and Normie happens to be living there, and we got to know him, and I didn't work, we knew him reasonably well, but not that well. And then back, well, let's think, he was the star of my 60th birthday, so that was, no, 50th, so that was 30 years ago. But we sort of grew close after that, and then I got into theatre, and I was producing quite a few big shows, and I did have Normie in a number of those shows.
Tell me about some of those shows.
All right, we just did the ones that people love. We did the Fiddlers on the Roof, the Oklahomas, the Sound of Music, Anything Goes, those sort of shows that went through. And then I tried to pick, like in the case of Oklahoma, there's a part called Judd Fry. He's a pretty mean and nasty man sitting in and so I said to Normie, do you want to drive this? Because Normie's not all that good with lines, but he's good at lots of things. And he said, yeah, I'll give it a crack. And he was great. He was really, really good. So I would get the Normie Rose and JP Wise and a whole lot of those guys at different people that were wanting to do something different, because they'd been on stage all their lives and they were used to that thing, but they weren't used to doing the stage stuff. So we did what is now known as pro-am theatre. We would get half a dozen pros and then a whole lot of very gifted amateurs that would love to be pros but didn't have the money to be able to do it, because there's no money in theatre, and or very, very little money in theatre. And we started doing that at a place called the Hills Centre in Sydney, in Castle Hill. It was a 1,600 seat theatre, 5 levels. It was beautiful. It was really good, and we were there for nearly 10 years doing those.
Was this a full-time job for you, or were you
earning
money doing it?
It became full-time. I left Lend Lease to take it on full-time, but we were running special events, and we were involved in things like the Tamworth Country Music Festival. We were staging carols at Jenolan Caves every year. We did that for 15 years. So we were in sort of events, musical type events, as well as the theatre. It was good.
I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 40dB and they're with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're in Big Little Small Talk, and we're talking to Lance Smith, who is an entertainer, an entrepreneur. But what I do want to go on to is your career in local government. So tell me about that. How did that come about?
Helen and I bought a little tiny motel in Bateman's Bay in 1970, at the end of 1970. We had the 3 kids there. And then when you're in business, you get a bit frustrated with the Chamber of Commerce. So I joined that, and I ended up becoming president. And then I sort of got a bit came to locks with council a few times, and so I stood for council, and I got on, and then I became deputy shire president, and eventually I became shire president of Eurobadalla, and I loved it. I wish, it's the old story, I wish I knew then what I know now. I could have done so much a better job. I thought at the time I did a terrific job, but in hindsight, I wished there's a few things I've learned in the years since. That was many years ago. But yes, I got involved, and then I was shire president for a few years, and I left because I was leaving Batemans Bay then to join Lend-Lease. And that was a great move. I never thought I'd leave Batemans Bay. It's a great spot, beautiful. But I needed to spread my wings, and I did, and it was a good move.
Was the career in local government, was that a full-time career, or were you still had
then.
the motel then?
Yeah, I still had the motel, plus I built a wildlife park.
A wildlife park?
Yeah, a wildlife park.
Okay, let's hear about the wildlife park, lads.
Well, it's still there, it's going well now. Pioneers don't make money. That was another discovery I made as I went through life. It's called Birdland down at Batemans Bay, and it's a wildlife sanctuary, and it was good. Again, it's one of those things, I lost a heap of money, but I would do it all over again. It was worth every bit of it, and the people that are there now, 50 years later, they're doing really well. So we built that. So I had the wildlife park, and I had the motel, and I was shire president. And in those days, we weren't rewarded as so many of you people are today. You can almost, I think most people today, make it a full, because it's worth it now. But I won't say it's a big wage. It's not a big wage, but at least you don't not out of pocket as we used to be back then.
Well, I was at something the other day, and there was a quote, and it said something like, "Your success as a leader isn't what you do, but what you put in motion." So maybe putting the wildlife. Why did you start a wildlife park? And was it just birds?
Okay. That was going to be my initial thing was just along the road from us on the waterfront. Every time I drove past this little headland, I thought it was Currumbin Bird Sanctuary, because it was set on the water, it looked the same, it felt the same. And I just casually said to the bloke from the Department of Lands one day, if we ever put in an application to develop that into a Currumbin style of thing, would you look at it? And they said yes. So that led to a 40-year lease, and that led to that going on. And I want to pick up on what you just said, because we started a thing in 1975 called the George Bass Surfboat Marathon, and it was a rowing race down the George Bass Strip for over 7 days, and we had teams from England, from Holland, from New Zealand, everything. And boy, all these years later, has that become something? And so yes, we started it, and it was tiny, and it was only 17 teams the first year we did it. And I'm really rapt that a lot of those things we did back then, Birdland, the George Bass and those sorts of things, are alive and well today.
Would that be why you were inducted into the Surf Life Saving Marathon Surfboat Rowers Hall of Fame?
Correct.
Is that the same thing?
A lot of people say, gee, you were a surfboat rower. No, I wasn't a surfboat rower. I ran that event, or I helped with the running of that event for 40-something years. And yes, I got inducted into the Surf Life Saving Rowers Hall of Fame.
Incredible, amongst other things. What about the TOO Society? What's that?
That was something funny. Way back in our Batemans Bay days, I suppose it was mid-70s, a fellow named Doug Brennan and I, things were tough, and we were talking about an idea that we just sort of floated about. At the end of the day, instead of just knocking off, why didn't you finish the job you're on, providing that the boss passed that saving on to whoever it was going to be. That was how it started. We then took a full-page ad in the Daily Telegraph in Sydney and challenged everybody to do what they were doing in Batemans Bay. We'd been doing it for about a month, and a lot of people came up with some pretty good ideas, just different things, and passing them on. And when I think about it now, we changed currency in '66, and this was about nearly 10 years later. And so the local newsagent, his staff were doing different things, so they sold the papers at a cent less. It wasn't much, but it was something being passed on all the time. It was just that way of showing how it was passed on, and it just took on. We ended up doing lots of radio interviews overseas. They flew me to New Zealand, we went over to Perth, we did all sorts of things, and it was good for Batemans Bay. It didn't do us any harm.
So TOO stands for Think of Others.
Think of Others.
So it wasn't just staying at work, it was sort of like a pay it forward type of thing.
Yes.
So when Oprah, or whoever it was, started that pay it forward, you'd been doing it in Batemans Bay forever.
We did. We kind of started that thing, and it was some people came up with some really good ideas and passed it on, and it was very evident that it was being passed on to people who didn't expect it. And now, yes, you're right. I hear about these things today where people, going to get a coffee and the bloke says, no, it's already been paid for. That gives people a lift.
So that's what this Think of Others scheme was.
Yeah.
It was an act of kindness for someone else.
Yeah,
really?
that had to be passed on.
Yeah. So Lance, you sound like you're a real goer, a real entrepreneur, right? So I would imagine you've had the ups, the really, really high highs, but I can imagine that you might have the low lows that come with that. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Financially and mentally and...
Yeah, in every other way. And I quite often think back, I've had 80 years to plan this, I quite often think back as to what I would change. And you know what, when you get to a destination, you really don't want to change anything because you might not get to that destination if you didn't go through all those things. And I would love to say that I learnt as I went along in all of these different things. My coping mechanism is really good. And I did learn, and now I try as I can, as best I can, to pass that on.
Mentoring young people, do you mean? Or
yes, I've been involved in mentoring young people for certainly while I was at Lendlease, so they let me do that quite a lot. But no, just since then I've been running events and involved in. We were involved in Bear Cottage for years in Sydney, and we established that. That was Australia's first children's hospice. And so then when they said they were going to have one in Brisbane, Hummingbird House, we said, righto, we'll put our hand up, and we did that one as well. And just different things that I've been involved in that I learnt a lot about, a lot of them were trailblazing stuff. And so we got behind it, and I've had a lot of fun with that. Angel Flight was another one. When it started in 2003, a Brisbane fellow, Bill Bristow, started this Angel Flight where they would fly out to the bush. It was non-emergency stuff, and they would get people who couldn't afford it, basically, to treatment at Toowoomba, where I was in Longreach. Toowoomba was basically our closest big hospital. So it'd be Rockhampton or Toowoomba, and they'd come and pick them up and bring them down, or they'd fly bodies home. They did all sorts of wonderful things. No government funding. So we got behind a few things like that, and we had a lot of fun.
What were you doing in Longreach, pray tell?
Well, it started off, we leased the two big motels out there, the Albert Park Motor Inn and the Longreach Motor Inn, in 1999. And Helen and I shifted out there. We ended up buying the taxis. We ended up putting a boat on the Thompson River, which is doing dinner cruises, sunset cruises, which is still probably one of the better businesses in Longreach today. It's a good one. It was wonderful, lovely. And we just got involved in a whole lot of things out there. We sold out in 2008, and then I stayed involved up there for another 9 years, working for Barcaldine Council and Longreach Council, staging events for Angel Flight, which was good.
Was it from that time there where you got the Vince Evatt Award for the most outstanding contribution by an individual to tourism in Queensland?
Correct. That's correct.
So tell me about that.
I was really lucky there. I was made the first ever life member of the Outback Queensland Tourism Association, and about 2 years later they asked me to go to the annual conference, which was up in Winton, and I did get the Vince Evatt. Now, Vince Evatt was a real stalwart of tourism out in Outback Queensland. He's long gone now, but great guy. And so they put out an award in his honour, and I got that, which was really good. It was really good.
Tell me about. I read that you're an aged event organiser. Now, I don't know whether it's events for aged people or you're an events of old aged events.
Sadly, they would be referring to my years on Earth, and yes, I do. I'm involved. We're staging a very big event in March next year out there, which I'm really looking forward to. So I love the Outback. I love Queensland's Outback. It's just fantastic.
So it's an aged event, or it's an event for aged people?
No, it's run by an aged fella.
Oh, I'm with you. You've got a couple of tattoos on your forearms. Tell me about getting the tattoos.
16, I was in England. I went out with a crowd of Australian sailors. I just remember waking up next morning. I had no idea I had newspaper wrapped around both arms, and it took about 3 weeks for all the blood to everything to go before I finally worked out what I'd had tattooed on my arms.
What have you got tattooed on your arms?
Well,
there?
it's totally indistinguishable now, but it's Jeff, Pat, and Lance. Jeff and I were both in love with the same girl. Her name was Pat, and I put Homeward Bound and a snake and a
dagger.
And a dagger.
Yeah.
And then just a map of Australia. It's one of the things that, given time over, I certainly wouldn't do it again.
Well, they're all the fashion now. Like you're ahead of your time, Lance.
Yeah, ahead of my
time.
time.
They're not out of place. Put it that way.
Well, maybe not. I'm too old-fashioned. I just look around, particularly with girls today, and I just see some of the damage that they've done, and I could just imagine what it's going to look like when they're 80. They're not going to be pretty.
Because you are 80. Did you have a big celebration?
Yeah, we had a great time. And Normie sang at that, Tanya Kernigan sang at that. It was just a whole lot of people sang and did things, and it was good fun. It was really good.
Yeah.
There was about 100 and something turned up, and we had a really good... But, of course, at 80, you have it in the afternoon.
What about your children, Lance? Are they entrepreneurial as well?
Oh, that's a good one. Yes and no. They're certainly not back. Well, I've got a son who's about to retire from the Air Force. He's been in the Air Force for 35 years and he actually finishes up next week. Then I've got a daughter who lives in the north of England in a 430-year-old heritage home. And one of the things I want to do before I fall off the perch is to go and see. They were on a 10-year restoration. They're in 7 years into the 10 years. It's a beautiful old place, and I want to go and see that. And then their other son's been with Qantas for about 25 years in the cabins, and he's done. They've all got kids. We're very, very lucky. Touch wood. We've got 7 really healthy grandkids. We've got great relationships.
They're all. So you obviously didn't repeat the sins of the father of your own.
You know what? I think I learnt from him. When my father died, there were 4 people at his funeral, and 2 were paid to be there. I was in Sydney on the day. I didn't go, and I think that's so sad. What I've missed out on, let alone what he missed out on. And yes, I think that's probably what has kept me. I do not damage relationships. That's a thing that just I hold sacrosanct. It's a very important thing to me.
It takes a big effort because sometimes people don't want to be their father, but somehow or other, despite that, or their mother, and they become that anyway, don't they?
They do.
Tell me about your books. This is The Brighter Side of a Death Threat.
The Brighter Side of the Death Threat was my first
book.
Go.
First book, yes.
And that was the autobiography side, I think. And I only did that for family. I wanted my grandkids. I realised that when I was a youngster, I only had one grandparent, but I didn't give a tuppenny damn about Constance Haldane. And it wasn't until I got old that I started to appreciate heritage and what it did. So when I wrote the book, and I had it printed, and I wrapped 7 of them up with a personal letter to each of my grandkids not to be opened until their 30th birthday. So they've all got them, and none of them are allowed to open it until they turn 30. Because I reckon by the time I was 30 and I had mortgages and some life under my belt and various things, I was really interested, and I wanted them to know that Pa was not just an old man on a walking frame, that he had a life and did some good things. So that's what I wrote it for. Then we had the dreaded COVID, and I'm sitting at Hastings Point twiddling my thumbs, and I thought, well, you know what, I really enjoyed doing that. I'll have a crack at a trilogy of crime. So I wrote Deeds of Salvation was the first one. The sequel to that is the one you came to the book launch Downsteam, was P.S. Drop Dead. And I only have 3 things left on my bucket list, and one of them is to write the 3rd book, which I'm not too far from starting.
And what are the other 2?
The other 2 are the ones you've seen.
No. What are the other 2 things on your bucket list?
I want to go and see Mel's house before it's finished, and I want to run the Trailblazer reunion next year. They're the only 3 things left. I've been very, very lucky, Megan. I've been able to do a lot of things, And I also now only have on my bucket list things that I really, really want to do. There are some things that were on it. I always wanted to go to Serengeti or Kenya or one of those wildlife parks and have a look at one of those, up close and personal. They're off now because they can't be done. Physically, I can't do it now. But there's not much. I really haven't missed out on much. So that's all those three things I want to do. I'm a realist. There's a country music bloke named John Howie, and he wrote a poem called The Line. And it's a story about we're in that line from the day we're born till the day we come to the other end of it. And we don't know where we are in the line. Well, when you get to my age, you know that you're down that end of the line. So it doesn't pay to get too carried away with what you want to do. But those three things, I'd be really happy if I can finish.
When are we starting the book?
Within the next 6 or 8 weeks. I'm getting a lot of things off my plate at the moment, and when I do that, I've got a particular time in mind that I want to be into it, but within the next 6 or 8 weeks I'll be into it, and I'll enjoy it.
Okay, listeners, we can hold you to it, Lance. If we haven't seen that book come out, have you got a title for the third in the trilogy?
No.
Okay, well we'll and where can we get a hold of the books?
Okay, if you go on to Lance Colbert Smith, it's only one long word, Lance Colbert Smith, all lowercase, .com.
Colbert, C-O-L-B-E-R-T.
Yep, LANCE-COLBERTSMITH, .com, and that'll take you straight there, and you can have a look at the 3 books that are there now. You can download parts of them for free. There's all sorts of things. And I'd love it if they would. I'd love it. Let me tell you, but being a self-publication, that's not for the faint-hearted either. You don't get rich.
No. Well, that's right. I can imagine.
One day.
We've still got plenty of time. We're still not at the end of that line there. No. So, Lance, if you look in the mirror, and the last time you looked in the mirror, what were your thoughts? What did you think?
Well, I've realised, I suppose, that I've saved 10 minutes a day having to have a comb and do my hair. But no, by and large, I see a well-travelled face that's had a pretty good run.
Yeah, lovely. I think maybe I was going to ask you if I'm frightened of anything. It is, after hearing that terrifying story of the cyclone, what are you frightened of, Lance?
You know what, now I can really honestly say the only thing I'm frightened of is not completing the 3 things I've got on my bucket list. I'm not worried about anything else. I'm certainly not worried about death. By gee, that's one thing that age does for you. It's a fact of life. And I'm really lucky. I've outlived so many people and so many things. Death does not worry me in the slightest. I'm selfish enough to tell you I don't want it to happen for the next 50 years, but I'm doubtful that I'll get to 130.
Perhaps a bit ambitious, but...
so that doesn't frighten me at all. But what does frighten me is not finishing those 3, and that shouldn't. But it's just 3 things that I'm hell-bent I want to do. And then I can pass off into the sunset very happily.
Yeah. Do you have a view on what's going to happen to you?
Oh yeah, definitely. And my wishes are very, very simple. It's illegal to spread ashes, so I won't tell you where I'm going to spread them, but they're going into 2 places that are very, very home to me anyway. And that's it. No plaques. I don't want a plaque. I don't want anything, because I look around and you talk to people today, when did you last go and visit your grandmother's grave? I tell you what, there's not many of them are going to answer in the affirmative. So I don't want any plaques or anything like that. I'm just one of these people who believes that as long as you're living in someone's heart, you're still around.
And do you have a view on what happens to us, our soul, or our, any of that after?
Isn't that wonderful? It's a great question, because my wife has very strong views and she believes in the hereafter and lots of good things. I would love to believe. I know this much. I'm a very spiritual person, and I know there are things out there that I just can't explain. So I'm therefore open to the fact that something is out there. I just can't believe a book called a Bible and some of the things that are in there, because when I was a young bloke, there was a fellow named Billy Graham, used to come out from America.
He's an evangelist, wasn't he?
An evangelist,
yeah.
And he was very, very good. And he used to gather the flock around him, and I think that there was a JC, and I think he was a Billy Graham of his day, that he got the flock around him as Billy Graham did. And there's been lots of fellas try since, some good con men, but there's been some very genuine people have tried since. So yes, I'm pretty well open to anything, but I'm sadly not the believer that my bride is.
Well, yes, different people, different views, isn't it? What about Lance? Could you describe yourself in 3 words? In 3 words, I am
a happy chappy, and I really say that because I am just so fortunate to have done and experienced life, that I would have to say that inwardly, and it's really important because the only person you're really accountable for is you, and I'm a happy chappy.
A happy chappy. That's great. It's got all the philosophy that you need, but you know, on the surface level, it's very good, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're self-content. If you were going to leave a part of your body to science, Lance, what would it be?
I know what I'd like it to be, my coping mechanism, but I don't know where it is. If they can find my coping mechanism...
up here in your noggin, maybe?
Yeah, probably. But if I had to find something definite, I think I'd probably like to leave my spine, because I've had to use it. I've had to need some strength from time to time, but different challenges that have happened in life. And
what's been the most challenging thing for you?
Oh dear, they go back probably.
Is it when you owed thousands of dollars to a venue operator and you had people coming to the show and
No, I remember once we put on a show at Star City in Sydney, and we borrowed $3.5 million, and we made $48,000. Oh dear, that's not good. That is not good. And even then, I think we're lucky to make the $48,000. No, that's never ever worried me particularly. I think when I was a kid, my mother particularly wanted me to become part of the church, and I was got at by my Sunday school teacher for years, and I didn't tell anyone, and that hurt. It was about probably 30 years, and a mate of mine, I was in a little town called Cootamundra, and a mate of mine who'd gone to school with me said to me, and we kept up close, and he mentioned one day about this fellow, and I said, "Oh, did you know him?" He said, "Yeah, did I ever?" And he got to him too, and we both talked about it, and funnily enough, I unloaded, and I still remember back now to that day. I look at stuff today where people are talking about abuse that happened when they were kids, and these people are now as old as me, and it's still badly affecting them. Well, I've got a coping mechanism, and I don't know how I did it, but that one, when I told John all those years later, I could feel my shoulders lifting, because you resolve those things against yourself. You think you did something wrong. These people convince you that you've done something wrong, that you made them do what they're doing. That's probably the worst one that I've had to overcome, because it was such a long time. Then some things happened in the fire brigade, a couple of things with deaths, the stuff that we would, particularly with children. And I drove tow trucks for years, which is not for the faint-hearted. I now understand what PTSD is. I didn't know that at the time. I don't think anyone did really. And I now understand there are things today that trigger things way back in my life that I have no control over. And I think now I look back at some of these people, the men and women that have come back from servicing, and the first responders and people like that, I think what the things that have happened to me, and I magnify that, and think of what those poor buggers go through. So I've had a fair bit of that. I've never been worried about the risks that we took financially. I worry more that I don't entertain people or keep people smiling or keep people happy. I worry about that every time I try and do an event and try and sometimes I bite off more than I chew, and I have to eat really quickly.
Eat humble pie. That was quite an emotive answer, Lance. Thank you for that and for your honesty, because I know that there's a lot of people out there who will have had similar experiences, and we've got a long way to go in terms of talking about the things that have traumatised us. Yeah.
We are getting there. There's no doubt about that. I look at it now. I think we've still got a long way to go. Still got a long way to go, but we are getting there. There's no doubt, and I hope they do.
Yes, me too. And as you say, the sharing the experience was part of the unburdening of it for you. Yeah. All right, I'm nearly out of time. You spent time in England as a 16-year-old and your formative years. Are you a royal watcher?
Yep. In fact, I'm probably even a bit of a monarchist. I think the Republic's going to come. I hope they don't change the flag. I really don't want to see it because it's part of what we all are. I don't mind if they if the Indigenous corner into it or whatever. That would worry me because there's a lot of First Nations things that I think we still have to address. But if I had to pick a favourite royal, it's definitely Princess Mary of Denmark. I mean, she is proof that you can pick up class in a pub.
All right, now this might be a loaded answer coming from you, given your entertaining history. What's the song that can't keep you off the dance floor?
Okay, probably I'd have a couple of strokes at that. Tanya Kernigan sings a song called 9 Mile Run, and if you've ever heard of it, you cannot stop tapping your feet. It's just such a great song. Down by the river on the 9 Mile Run. That would have me toe tapping, but sadly my dancing days are over. My partner now is a walking frame. Oh, the other one, there's a lady who nobody's ever heard of called Ellie Greenwich. Right? You've never heard of Ellie Greenwich, but she wrote some of the great songs. She wrote things like River Deep, Mountain High, Chapel of Love, all of those songs, and she wrote one called Do-Wah-Diddy, Do-Wah-Diddy-Diddy, Dum-Diddy-Doo, and Da-Do Run Run, the best Christmas song ever, Christmas Baby Won't You Please Come Home, and Do-Wah-Diddy, that would get me on the dance floor. Do-Wah-Diddy and Tanya's 9 Mile Run.
Oh, well, that we'll go searching for one of those, and I'm sure Leroy will play it for me. But Lance, you've had a fascinating life, and I know that there's more to come, and I am so privileged that you've shared your story with me today on Big Little Small Talk.
I am delighted to have shared it with you. It was good. It was great fun. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Lance. That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.